Kenora Rainy River. Thank you to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance. The government has promised countless things in their party statement that they plan to accomplish, such as investing money into building, repairing, and modernizing courthouses, investing in programs to enhance skills development and training, upgrading roads and telecommunication, and many, many more things, costing billions and taking ages to implement. Conveniently, they will not talk about the sourcing for all of this money, which will look like raising taxes for all Ontarians when the majority of them are already suffering from this economic crisis that we're in. This overly idealistic government does not understand that we can just go around frivolously spending taxpayers' dollars. So, Speaker, my question is, where do they plan to get this money from?
The member from Kenora Rainy River, who was your question addressed to?
The Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member from Kenora River for asking about our source of funding for all these projects. I did want to bring up a previous statement from your own party saying that you would wish to greatly increase funding for things like infrastructure in Northern Ontario and Indigenous communities. So, in response, I would essentially pose the same question. We are going to get our... Where's the money coming from? The money would be coming from an increase in corporate taxes as corporate income has exploded in the wake of the pandemic. A statement from Loblaws itself states that in the quarters of 1, 2, 3, and 4 in 2023, they received growth of 4.2%, 24.9%, 7.5%, and 8.3%. Institutions such as the Harvard School of Business states that a good rate for government growth or business growth is to exceed the growth of GDP. In Canada, the growth of GDP was around 1% over that fiscal period. So they have, by magnitudes, exceeded the growth of the economy and have raised prices on everyday, hard-working Canadians who do not deserve to have their lives stolen from them by where they're supposed to get their groceries to feed their own families. So we propose, just even an example, a 0.5% increase to the corporate tax rate. 0.5 would bring $1.2 billion a year to the province, which would more than cover even the most pessimistic projections for the cost of our bill. Thank you, Speaker.
Supplementary, I recognize the member from Mississauga Lakeshore.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is again directed to the Minister of Finance. Looking at the bill, the government estimates an initial cost of $440 million, of which would very likely increase with future unaccounted costs that will arise with the implementation of the bill. And now, Speaker, the government has already answered the question of where this money the funding of this program will come from, which they state will come from taxing large corporations and will generate over supposedly $1.2 billion. But, Speaker, I would like to ask, instead, of course, of taxing already struggling Ontarians, is really spending $1.2 billion on this co-op program while thousands of other Ontarians are already struggling to make ends meet, Speaker, are already struggling to make ends meet, is spending $1.2 billion on this exact co-op program the really best beneficial way of spending that money?
I appreciate your enthusiasm for your members and your statements, and the statements are excellent, but I've been told by the clerks that we're not going to get through question period if there's so much applause. So please reduce the applause a little bit, and I recognize now the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you for the member, to the member for the question. Now, the member may recall in my previous statement that I noted the income from this new tax revenue would more than cover the most pessimistic projections received from the opposition and third parties, which put it near $770 million as opposed to our $440 million, leaving hundreds of millions open to other programs like the program suggested by the official opposition, such as increase in infrastructure in Northern Ontario and for Indigenous communities. So I wonder why the official opposition also states as taxing exploding profits on corporations is equivalent to taxing hard-working Canadians when all we've seen in these stores is price increases and price gouging as competitors cooperate and collude to increase their own prices and put the pain into the backs of everyday hard-working Ontarians. The co-op bill is intending to give each Ontarian who graduates our high schools or separate system schools the opportunity to get experience to enter the workforce with good experience that will allow us to be exposed to more hardworking Ontarians who can easily get jobs. Again, the money will come from taxing heavy profits on corporations, and this will $1.2 billion will not be spent on the co-op bill. It is as simple as that.
The Speaker has to hear the person who's speaking, so please keep the cackling down. Further questions? I recognize the member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is the Minister of Finance.
Okay. Please don't applaud when the person just stands up. If you want to applaud after they speak, just do it, but make it brief, or we won't get through all the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, this government's promises are centered upon spending billions on large-scale projects. What they do not comment on is the plan to pay for these grand promises. Antithetically to their first pledge, this government is promising to reduce inflation and lower the cost of living for everyday Ontarians. Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that massive spending quickly becomes massive inflation, and that it is simply not possible to inject billions into an economy and expect inflation to stay at reduced levels. To sustain such spending, the government will be forced into a deficit and will be forced to borrow money. Mr. Speaker, Ontario is already at a critical juncture where our province and our country as a whole is fighting inflation. Enormous spending like that, which this government proposes, and their party statement, will only hurt Ontarians. So I ask, this is the minister opposite, will this government commit to not raising taxes on Ontarians so Ontarians can go home to their families with larger, more effective paychecks? Yes or no?
Thank you. Which minister is your question addressed to? I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm really getting a workout on my vocal cords today. So, Party C brings up that we are going to be pushed into a deficit with large spending, but I'd like to counter with the fact that projections from government sources, the public can find them at ontario.ca, project a government surplus of $4.4 billion in the fiscal period of 25 to 2026. And again, added revenue from increasing taxes on corporations who are not individuals, who are not hardworking Ontarians. These are conglomerates of several chains who overprice their goods and make it harder for the average Ontarian to get what they need to simply survive. The funding that we get from this is going to be put into co-op programs, which will help alleviate the labor shortage, especially that in the agriculture industry agriculture sector and trades. By increasing the experience of our high school students and exposing employers to new minds who are eager to enter the workforce, they get new opportunities to hire these students straight out of high school and offer them apprenticeships for when they enter college or trade schools or whatever post-secondary pathway they wish to pursue. This funding will allow the government and the people of Ontario to build a prosperous future for all Ontarians. Thank you, Speaker.
Supplementary. I recognize the member for Ottawa South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is again for the Minister of Finance. Here. In the government bill, Section 5 states that, quote, the Government of Ontario will subsidize host businesses the equivalent of 180 hours of work at the student minimum wage for each co-op student through bi-weekly payments, end quote. These work hours for students across Ontario will cost this province $440 million and can result in additional unforeseen costs. Recently, Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of speaking to one of my constituents, Dan Smith, who said that if he was taxed further, he would no longer be able to afford to put his students and children into extracurricular activities. These testimonies are becoming more and more common across Ontario. Families can barely afford the bare essentials, and this is impacting their standard of living. So I asked the minister opposite, does this government intend to create an even greater deficit, putting more inflationary and financial pressures on Ontarians, or does this government intend to cut programs and services that in effect will further reduce the Ontarian quality of life?
Response. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you for the fourth time, Speaker. I would like to start my response with first asking if Party C or Party B intends to ask the same question again. I'm just a little bit confused. And if they're planning on asking any topics unrelated to my own ministry when we have an impressive cabinet of exceptionally hardworking individuals who help serve our Ontarians every single day. And once again, the third party brings up that they don't want to see the average Ontarian taxed even further, when in our party statement we specifically state we wish to raise taxes on corporations and help alleviate the tax burden on individuals themselves. Once again, this funding from the increase in corporate taxes will offer more than enough for this co-op program and can be used towards other programs, such as the ones that we have received from the official opposition in their own statement at the beginning of these proceedings. How else would the third party of the House seek to invest in Ontario's future? Or would they simply wish to reduce spending and put less money in the pockets of our own social services and those who help bring Ontarians out of poverty? Thank you, Speaker.
Further questions? I recognize the member for Markham-Stouffville.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker.